A match strikes. Orange light catches the edge of a pile of branches 10 feet high. Smoke curls upward into a gray October sky above western Kansas. And within minutes, 3 seasons of growth, oak limbs, maple brush, storm-fallen timber, turn to ash on the ground. Darnell Whitfield watches it burn. He does this every fall. Has done it every fall for 19 years. His father did it before him. His grandfather before that. You pile the branches. You light the match. You move on. That is the rule nobody wrote down, but everybody follows. Welcome to Earth Lost Vault and Secret. If this is your first time joining us, this channel is dedicated to revealing the hidden farming secrets and techniques that the system has spent billions to keep hidden from the earth. Feel relaxed, and make sure to watch this with your family and friends. But before we move on, hit that subscription button. It's free, and that's the only way we can grow this channel. If you are a returning friend, thank you for always supporting what we do here. We must say we love you sincerely. Let's now dive deep to what we have today. Listen keenly, you have a lot to learn. The fire pops and breathes. Darnell pulls his collar up against the cold and watches 2,000 pounds of hardwood disappear into smoke. His water bill from this past summer sits folded in his jacket pocket. He has not opened it yet. He already knows what it says. Hi viewers, have you ever burned branches or thrown away wood from your yard without a second thought? Drop a yes or a no in the comments right now. 3 miles east, his neighbor Kwame Osei is doing the same thing. Different pile. Same match. Same smoke rising into the same sky. Between the two of them, they will burn or haul away enough organic material this season to fill a small warehouse. They will spend the following spring paying irrigation companies to pump water from an aquifer that gets thinner every single year. Nobody questions this. That is the part that should stop you cold. Because buried 6 feet underground, those same branches, the ones currently turning to smoke and carbon, can hold enough moisture to water a full garden through 120 years of summers. No hose. No irrigation line. No monthly bill. 1 burial. A century of water. So why is Darnell standing in a field, watching the answer to his water bill turn to ash? The Ogallala Aquifer stretches beneath 8 states. It feeds nearly a third of all groundwater irrigation in the United States. And according to the Kansas Geological Survey, some sections of it are dropping more than 2 feet every single year. Farmers across the Great Plains spend millions chasing a water table that keeps running from them. Towns hold emergency meetings about it. State legislatures argue over it. Meanwhile, the branches burn. Darnell folds his arms and watches the last of the oak limbs collapse into embers. He has a drought coming next summer. He does not know that yet. He does not know that his yield will drop 30%. He does not know that his neighbor 3 miles west, a soil scientist named Dr. Caleb Mercer, has not turned on an irrigation pivot in 2 years. He does not know what is buried under Mercer's field. But one morning in early spring, he is going to find out. And when he does, something is going to shift in him that no amount of fertilizer or rainfall will ever be able to undo. Dr. Caleb Mercer is standing waist-deep in a trench when his phone rings. He lets it ring. The trench is 4 feet deep, 30 feet long, cut straight through a quarter-acre plot on the western edge of his property outside Garden City, Kansas. His boots are caked with dark soil. His arms are scratched from dragging oak logs. He has been out here since 5 in the morning, and it is now past noon, and he does not care. The phone rings again. He lets it ring again. The call is from the regional extension office. They want him to come explain himself at the next quarterly meeting. Word has traveled fast in small towns. A soil scientist with a federal research background has stopped irrigating. has dug up his field, is burying trees underground like a man who has lost his professional mind. Caleb sets an oak trunk, 8 inches thick, 4 feet long, into the trench floor and presses it firmly with his boot. He is not lost. He is furious. The Ogallala is dying. He has watched the data for 11 years. He has written the reports. He has sat in the meetings where men in clean shirts argue about sustainable yield, while the aquifer drops another inch. He has listened to irrigation salesmen pitch newer, more efficient pivot systems with the enthusiasm of people selling tickets on a sinking ship. So he stopped listening. And he started digging. The science was not new. That was the part that woke him up at 3 in the morning. It was not some radical discovery. It was old. Documented. Published in agricultural manuals before most of the irrigation infrastructure in this county even existed. Buried wood holds water. Buried wood feeds fungal networks. Buried wood becomes an underground reservoir that costs nothing and lasts generations. It had simply been set aside. Caleb layers smaller branches above the oak trunks. Then, a heavy spread of green compost mixed with aged manure. Then, packed firmly. He moves with purpose, no wasted motion, like a man building something he intends to outlive him. His wife, Renata, brings water out at 2 o'clock. She does not ask questions. She has been married to Caleb for 16 years. She recognizes the look on his face. It is the same look he had the night he read the 1954 Kansas Agricultural Experiment Station report, and sat at the kitchen table without speaking for 20 minutes. The first season comes and goes. The results are unimpressive. Slightly uneven surface. Modest growth. Neighbors who drive past slow down, squint, and drive on. At the extension meeting, a senior agronomist uses the phrase, "well-intentioned but impractical." Someone in the back of the room laughs. Caleb writes the word "Year 1" in his field journal and closes it. Because underground, something has already started. The logs are absorbing. The fungal threads are waking. The moisture is being pulled inward, stored, and locked inside with structures that will not surrender it to evaporation or runoff. It is happening in the dark, beneath 3 feet of Kansas soil, invisible and patient. Then the drought declaration comes. Statewide. The worst in 40 years. Mandatory water restrictions. Emergency meetings. Farmers across 3 counties are watching their fields crack open in the August heat. Caleb does not call the irrigation company. He walks his field instead. And what he sees in the soil makes him stop walking and stand very still in the middle of his rows, looking down, breathing slowly, because the data in front of him is either the most important thing he has ever measured in his career, or he has made a mistake somewhere that he cannot find. He pulls out his phone and calls Renata. "Come to the east plot," he says, "and bring the soil probe." The corn is standing straight up. That is the first thing Darnell Whitfield notices when he pulls his truck off the road and looks across the fence line into Caleb Mercer's field. It is 11 in the morning. August. The temperature is 94 degrees, and the air above the cracked clay on Darnell's side of the fence shimmers like heat off a highway. But on Mercer's side, the corn leaves are upright. Not curled. Not yellowed at the edges. Upright. Dark green. Still. Darnell gets out of his truck. He stands at the fence line and looks from his field to Mercer's field and back again. His rows are showing stress he recognized 2 weeks ago, but refused to name out loud. Early tassel drop. Leaf curl at midday. The kind of signs that do not lie. He has already mentally adjusted his yield projections downward. He is already calculating what he will tell his loan officer in October. Across the fence, Caleb Mercer's corn does not look like it received the same memo. Darnell drives to Mercer's gate. Caleb is in the field when Darnell pulls up, crouched at the base of a corn row with a soil probe in one hand and a small notebook in the other. He looks up without surprise. As if he expected this visit. as if he had been waiting for it. Moisture reading? Darnell asks. Caleb hands him the probe display. 31% soil moisture at a depth of 24 inches. On a day when Darnell's own readings came in at 14% and falling. In the same county. Under the same sky. With zero irrigation activity on Mercer's end for the past 8 weeks. Darnell stares at the number. Surface temperature runs about 6 degrees cooler here, too, Caleb says, standing up. Consistent across the whole plot. Darnell looks down at the dark soil. It does not look dramatically different. No obvious surface treatment. No drip lines. No buried sensors, tanks, or equipment he can point to and explain. What did you do to it? Darnell asks. Buried wood, Caleb says. Darnell waits for more. There is no more. He walks the rows slowly. The root systems he can see at the surface edges of the beds look deeper than normal. The soil between rows is cool to the touch when he crouches and presses his palm against it. Cool in August. In Kansas. With no water input for 8 weeks. He does not say anything for a long time. Then he says, How deep? 4 feet at the base layer, Caleb says. Oak and maple trunks, then smaller branches, then compost with green nitrogen material, then soil packed tight over the top. That's it. That's it. Darnell stands up. He looks back across the fence at his own field. A dust plume drifts off the east edge of his property, where the topsoil is dry enough to move in the wind. The local extension office sends 2 agents out 3 days later to take core samples from Mercer's plot. They measure. They record. They exchange looks they believe are subtle but are not. Back at the regional office, one of the agents pulls a reference binder from a shelf that has not been opened in years. He is looking for context. For something that explains what he measured in that field. Something that makes the numbers make sense. He finds it. And what he reads on those pages makes him set the binder down and stare at the wall. Because this method was not invented last year. It was not a new trial or a university experiment or a modern innovation. It was old American agricultural knowledge. Documented. Published. Taught. And then, somewhere between a world war and a fertilizer market, it simply disappeared. The binder is dated 1943. Federal printing. USDA letterhead. Wartime paper, slightly brown at the edges. The extension agent, a third-generation Kansas farmer named Jerome Pulliam, reads the relevant section twice before he believes what it says. Trench composting with woody material. Deep organic layering. Woodcore garden beds for moisture retention and long-term soil fertility. Not as fringe advice. Not as an experimental footnote. As a recommended practice. Printed by the United States Department of Agriculture. Distributed to Victory Garden participants across the country during World War II. Jerome turns the page. More documentation. A 1954 study from the Kansas Agricultural Experiment Station. Researchers measured evaporation rates under varying mulch depths. 3 inches of organic cover reduced surface evaporation by 67% in controlled summer trials. Heavier organic layering, the report noted, produced proportionally greater moisture retention at depth. Jerome does the math in his head. 3 feet of buried wood is not 3 inches of mulch. It is not twice the effect or 3 times. The absorption dynamics operate differently underground, slower release, longer duration, no direct sun exposure to accelerate evaporation. The numbers Caleb Mercer recorded in his field notebook align almost exactly with what a researcher in 1954 predicted would happen if the layering principle were taken deeper. Somebody knew this. Somebody wrote it down. Published it. Put it in the hands of American farmers at a time when the country needed every food system advantage it could find. Jerome keeps reading. Iowa State University soil carbon studies from the mid-20th century documented the long-term relationship between buried organic matter and soil aggregate stability. Stable aggregates hold water. They resist compaction. They create the underground architecture that root systems need to go deep instead of staying shallow and dependent on surface irrigation. Early Appalachian farming communities in the eastern United States practiced a version of this without a university study to validate it. They built raised beds over wood cores because that was what worked. Passed the knowledge down through families. Maintained productive gardens on steep hillsides with poor rainfall patterns, without access to any irrigation infrastructure at all. The knowledge existed. It was not hidden. It was not classified. It was sitting in extension binders, agricultural experiment station archives, and old farming manuals in the back rooms of county libraries. Jerome closes the binder and sets it on his desk. He thinks about the pivot irrigation rigs visible from the highway running east out of Garden City. Enormous machines. Quarter-mile arms sweeping slow circles over flat fields. Each one represents a capital investment that runs between $50,000 and $500,000, depending on the system. Each one is drawing from the same aquifer that the Kansas Geological Survey says is declining every single year. He thinks about the extension curriculum he went through 15 years ago. Soil chemistry. Fertilizer application rates. Irrigation scheduling. Water use efficiency is measured in gallons per bushel. A full year of training and not one session on buried organic matter. Not 1 hour on woodcore moisture retention. Not one mention of the 1954 Kansas study sitting in the binder on his shelf. He picks up his phone and calls Caleb Mercer. "The method you're using," Jerome says. "I found documentation going back to the 1940s. USDA. Kansas State. Iowa. It was all there." Caleb is quiet for a moment. "I know," he says. "Then why did it disappear?" Jerome asks. Caleb's answer is short. 3 words. "Flat land," he says. "Machines." Jerome looks out his window at the flat horizon that runs unbroken in every direction. And for the first time in his career, he wonders whether the landscape itself was designed, not by nature, but by economic pressure, to make certain kinds of knowledge impossible to keep. In 1947, the United States fertilizer market was worth less than $1 billion. By 2022, according to the USDA Economic Research Service, American farmers spent more than $37 billion on fertilizer in a single year. $37 billion. That number does not happen by accident. After World War II ended, the plants that had been manufacturing nitrogen for explosives needed a new customer. The chemistry was already built. The infrastructure was already running. The only question was what to sell it for. The answer came fast. Ammonium nitrate, the core compound in wartime munitions, became the foundation of commercial nitrogen fertilizer. The same factories. The same chemistry. A new market. And it worked. Yields climbed. Production scaled. American agriculture exploded in output through the 1950s and 1960s in ways that looked, from the outside, like pure triumph. But fertilizer needs water to work. Nutrients in solid or granular form do not move through soil without moisture to carry them. To get the chemical inputs to the root zone, you need irrigation. To justify the irrigation infrastructure, you need the scale that makes the capital investment rational. To achieve that scale, you need flat, uniform, machine-accessible fields. And flat, uniform, machine-accessible fields have no room for trenches filled with buried logs. The center pivot irrigation system was patented in 1952 by Frank Zyback, a Colorado farmer. Within 2 decades it had transformed the Great Plains. Aquifer water that had accumulated over thousands of years began moving upward through wells at a rate that had no historical parallel. Fields that had never been farmed became productive. The Ogallala became the engine of American grain production. Meanwhile, the extension offices that had distributed USDA trench composting manuals in 1943 began updating their curricula. New funding arrived from agricultural input companies through university research partnerships. The focus shifted toward measurable, scalable, purchasable solutions. Soil carbon retention systems that required no inputs, no equipment, and no annual spending were not high priorities for programs funded by industries that sold inputs, equipment, and annual services. Tavarius Odom ran a small experimental farm in central Iowa during the 1960s. He had practiced layered wood-bed gardening since his mother taught him in the 1940s. He applied twice for state extension program funding to document his moisture retention results formally. Rejected both times. The review board cited lack of scalability as the core issue. His beds, they said, could not be replicated efficiently at a commercial scale. He kept farming his way until 1979. His yields were consistent. His water usage was low. He never had an irrigation pivot. He never bought into the nitrogen subscription. Nobody documented him. Scalability was the word that ended the conversation every time someone raised decentralized soil systems in an academic or policy setting. The buried log method works brilliantly at 1 acre. At 1,000 acres, it cannot be done by machine. At 10,000 acres, it is not even discussable. So the discussion stopped. Federal subsidy programs through the 1960s and 1970s rewarded irrigation infrastructure upgrades. Conservation program criteria were written around practices that had commercial supply chains behind them. The organic, self-sustaining soil practices that required nothing from outside vendors generated no economic activity that could be tracked, taxed, or encouraged by policy. No corporation can patent a log. No supply chain is built around the branch pile at the edge of your fence line. And so the branch pile kept burning. Jerome Pulliam knows all of this now. He has spent 3 weeks reading. 3 weeks tracing the gap between what the 1943 manual recommended and what is being taught in the county extension office today. He has a meeting with the regional agricultural director next Thursday. He has 14 pages of documented evidence. He is not sure how it will go, because the director sits on the advisory board of 2 agricultural input companies. And what Jerome is about to walk in and say is that the single most effective moisture retention system available to farmers in a drought emergency costs nothing, requires no vendors, and has been documented in federal archives for over 80 years. He parks his truck outside the regional office, picks up his folder, and walks toward a door he is not certain will open the same way again once he steps through it. The soil probe goes in at 6 in the morning. Caleb Mercer pushes it down through the surface layer, past the topsoil, past the compost zone, all the way to 24 inches. The reading comes back before he finishes exhaling. 33% moisture. No rain in 19 days. No irrigation. No external water input of any kind. He pulls the probe out and pushes it into the ground 12 feet away, outside the buried wood zone. 14%. Same field. Same sky. Same 19 days without rain. He writes both numbers down. This is not luck. This is physics. And Caleb has spent the last 2 years learning to speak that physics like a second language, because the first language, the one the extension office taught him, the one built on soluble inputs and scheduled irrigation, no longer explains what he is watching happen in his own soil. Here is what the ground is doing that nobody is talking about. Hardwood logs, oak, maple, beech, are not passive once buried. The lignin and cellulose packed inside every log act the way a sponge acts, but slower and deeper. A single cubic yard of buried hardwood can absorb and internally hold moisture equivalent to hundreds of gallons. Not sitting on top of the wood. Inside the structural fibers of the wood itself. The U.S. Forest Products Laboratory documented hardwood moisture absorption rates reaching 150 to 200% of dry weight. That means the wood doubles its own mass in stored water before it releases a single drop upward. And it does not evaporate. Surface moisture under direct Kansas sun disappears within hours on a dry day. Buried moisture under 3 feet of soil does not see the sun. It does not feel the wind. It sits inside the wood structure and releases upwards slowly through capillary action, the same natural process that pulls water up through the roots of every tree on earth, feeding root systems from below, quietly, continuously, without any human instruction. That is the first mechanism. There is a second one. And it is the one that changes the math entirely. As the buried logs begin their slow decomposition, a process that takes decades, not months, fungal networks move in. Mycorrhizal fungi colonize the wood's surface and extend outward through the surrounding soil in thread networks thinner than human hair but collectively enormous in reach. Oregon State University's soil biology program published research in 2016 documenting that mycorrhizal networks can extend plant root access up to 700% beyond the normal root zone. 700%. A tomato plant with a normal root reach of 18 inches suddenly has access to a zone more than 10 feet in every direction. A corn root that would stop at 2 feet can pull from 4. The fungal threads move water and phosphorus and nitrogen from the decomposing wood upward to the living plant above, acting as an underground supply chain that runs without electricity, without pumps, and without a monthly bill. Caleb explains this to Darnell Whitfield one afternoon, standing in the field with the soil probe between them. Darnell listens with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, the way a man listens when he is hearing something that makes him angry, not at the speaker, but at the years he spent not knowing it. So the wood is feeding the fungus, Darnell says. And the fungus is feeding the plant. And storing the water while it does it, Caleb says. Darnell looks down at the ground. How long does it last? Hardwood cores 8 to 12 inches thick, Caleb says, can hold structural integrity for 60 to 120 years depending on the species and the climate. Darnell is quiet for a long time. 1 burial, he finally says. 1 burial, Caleb confirms. But here is where most people fail when they try this. And Caleb is direct about it because he has seen it go wrong. Fresh wood buried without a nitrogen balance creates a problem in the first season. High carbon material draws nitrogen from the surrounding soil as it begins to decompose. Plants above show yellowing leaves. Stunted growth. The gardener blames the method and walks away. But the method is not the problem. The nitrogen drawdown is a temporary chemical reality that every compost practitioner understands. It requires a buffer. Aged manure. Green compost. Leguminous cover crops are planted above the bed in year 1. Skip that layer, and the system fights itself. But there is a second failure point that Caleb has never seen discussed in any online tutorial about this method. And it has nothing to do with nitrogen. It has to do with air. The air pocket collapses at 2 in the morning. Caleb is not there when it happens. But the next morning, he finds a 12-inch surface depression running across the northeast corner of his newest bed, a slow sinkage that opened overnight. He knows immediately what caused it. He did not pack the layer between the large logs and the smaller branches firmly enough. A gap remained. Over 4 months, the logs shifted slightly as moisture moved through them, and the gap collapsed inward. He marks the spot. Grabs a tamping bar. Gets to work. This is the part that separates results from failure. Not the choice of wood species. Not the trench depth. Not even the nitrogen layer, though that matters enormously. The invisible enemy of every buried wood system is space. Every air pocket trapped between logs during installation becomes a future collapse point. Every loose gap becomes a cavity that the surface soil eventually falls into. The bed sinks. Roots are disrupted. The gardener assumes the whole system is broken. It is not broken. It was not packed. Caleb learned this in year 1. He packs every layer now with deliberate, aggressive compression. Smaller branches fill gaps between large logs. Green material fills gaps between branches. Soil is packed in stages, not dumped all at once. He waters once immediately after completion, not to hydrate the bed, but to initiate fungal colonization and let the surface settle so any remaining voids reveal themselves before planting begins. Now, here is the build sequence that Caleb has refined across 4 seasons. Dig the trench at a minimum of 3 feet deep on a backyard scale. 4 feet if the climate runs dry. The depth is not decorative. It is the buffer zone that keeps buried moisture below the evaporation threshold. A 2-foot trench in a Kansas summer is not enough. The heat reaches it. Layer 1 goes down first. Hardwood logs, 4 to 8 inches in diameter, are laid horizontally across the trench floor. Oak is ideal. Maple works well. Beech holds moisture exceptionally. Avoid black walnut. Its natural compounds suppress plant growth through a process called allelopathy. Avoid cedar for the same reason. These are not theories. They are documented soil chemistry realities. Use the wrong wood and the system poisons what it is supposed to feed. Layer 2 is smaller branches and brush, packed tight over the log base, filling every visible gap. Layer 3 is the one most amateur attempts skip. A thick application of nitrogen-rich organic material. Aged manure, hot compost, fresh grass clippings, or a combination of all 3. This layer does 2 things simultaneously. It buffers the nitrogen drawdown from the decomposing wood. And it accelerates fungal colonization by providing an immediate food source for the microbial community that will manage the entire system for the next century. Layer 4 is topsoil, packed firmly in stages, crowned slightly above grade to account for minor settling over the first season. Water once. Plant according to your zone and season. Then step back. The timeline is not negotiable. Year 1 looks ordinary. Sometimes slightly underwhelming. The system is being built underground, not performing above it. Year 2 shows the shift. Moisture retention climbs. Root systems deepen noticeably. Supplemental watering drops. Year 3 is when the conversation changes. By year 3, the fungal network has matured enough to operate as a full underground distribution system, and the plants above it stop behaving like plants that need to be managed and start behaving like plants that belong where they are. Caleb shared this build sequence with a retired school librarian named Josephine Treadwell, who lives 4 miles outside Garden City. She built one bed in her backyard in the spring of 2 years ago. 12 feet long, 3.5 feet deep. She followed every layer. She added the nitrogen buffer. She packed it aggressively. Her municipal water account flagged an anomaly the following summer. Usage had dropped so sharply compared to her previous 3-year average that the city's automated system generated a review notice assuming her meter was malfunctioning. The meter was fine. The wood was working. But what Josephine discovered in her 3rd season, something she did not expect and Caleb had not specifically warned her about, would change how she talked about soil for the rest of her life. Josephine Treadwell is standing in her backyard at 7 in the morning, barefoot in the grass, holding a tomato that should not exist. It is late August. The Regional Water Authority issued a Stage 2 drought restriction 2 weeks ago. Her neighbors on both sides are hauling watering cans to keep container plants alive. The grass across the street is the color of straw. The city park 3 blocks over shut off its irrigation system entirely under the emergency order. Josephine's garden looks like a different season. The tomato in her hand is the size of a softball. Deep red. Unblemished. She has not watered this bed in 11 days. Not because she forgot. Because the soil moisture reading she took yesterday morning told her it did not need it. She puts the tomato in her basket and picks up her phone. She has been keeping records since day 1. Water usage logs. Soil probe readings twice weekly. Yield measurements by weight. She is not a scientist. She is a retired school librarian who spent 30 years teaching children that evidence matters. So she collects evidence. Over 3 full growing seasons, her irrigation need for the buried wood bed has dropped 61% compared to her conventional raised bed on the opposite side of the yard. Same size, same soil amendments, same sun exposure. The only difference is what is 4 feet underground. She is not alone in these numbers. A backyard grower in Colorado Springs named Marcus Delacroix built 2 buried wood beds in the spring of 2020. By his 3rd season, his supplemental watering was down 58%, and his late-season yield on tomatoes and peppers ran roughly 30% above his previous conventional bed averages. He tracks everything in a simple spreadsheet. The data is not complicated. The results are not ambiguous. A small homestead outside Amarillo in the Texas Panhandle, run by a couple named Adrian and Deontay Frazier, buried storm-felled cottonwood trunks from a 2019 ice storm across 4 large garden beds. During the 2022 Texas drought, a summer that saw mandatory water restrictions across most of the Panhandle, their beds required 40% less supplemental irrigation than the control beds they maintained on the same property. For comparison, Adrian wrote the numbers down in a composition notebook. She did not publish them. She did not need to. The food fed her family. In Sacramento, an urban grower named Simone Arsenault converted a vacant lot garden to buried wood beds in 2021 after reading about the method in a regional permaculture newsletter. Her water bills through 2 dry California summers dropped enough to fund the expansion of 2 additional garden beds with the savings. She posted her moisture readings online. The post was shared over 4,000 times before she stopped counting. These are not university trials. These are ordinary people in ordinary backyards running the same experiment independently and arriving at the same conclusion. The University of Vermont Extension conducted a more formal comparison in 2013. Raised beds with buried woody cores against conventional tilled beds over 3 growing seasons. At peak summer drought conditions in year 3, moisture retention in the woodcore beds measured 28% higher than the control beds. No drip lines. No irrigation. 20% higher. Published. Available. And decomposition modeling for hardwood cores 8 to 12 inches in diameter places structural longevity at 60 to 120 years, depending on climate and species. That means Josephine Treadwell's backyard bed, the one she built 2 years ago with her own hands on a retired librarian's budget, may still be functioning as an underground water reservoir when her grandchildren are old enough to have grandchildren of their own. 1 morning. 1 trench. 1 century. Meanwhile, across the country, an estimated 90% of topsoil faces severe degradation risk by 2050 under current erosion and depletion trends, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. The same organic matter that could slow that degradation, the branches, the brush, the storm-fallen timber, is being burned or chipped or sent to landfills in every county in America, every single fall. But the number that nobody in the agricultural policy world seems to want to say out loud is this. The solution is free. It requires no input purchase. No equipment lease. No annual renewal. No supply chain. No subscription. Just a trench. And the will to remember what was buried along with the logs. Adrian Frazier is on her knees in the garden when her daughter asks the question. The girl is 7 years old. She is watching her mother press soil around the base of a pepper plant with both hands. The garden around them is green and heavy in late August, the kind of green that does not belong to the Texas Panhandle in drought season. The neighbor's yard beyond the fence is dry and pale and gives up a thin dust when the afternoon wind moves through it. The girl looks from the neighbor's yard to her mother's garden. "Why is ours different?" she asks. Adrian sits back on her heels. She looks at the bed under her hands. She thinks about how to answer a 7-year-old's question with the truth without losing her temper. "Because of what's underneath," she says finally. "That is the whole story." That is the answer to every question this method raises. Not what is visible. Not what is purchased, applied, or managed from above. What is underneath? What was put there before the first seed went in? What is working in the dark, without instruction, without cost, without end? Before center pivot systems transformed the Great Plains. Before synthetic nitrogen rewrote the economics of American grain production. Before the Extension Office curricula shifted toward measurable, purchasable inputs, American farmers worked with what the land gave them. They layered manure over wood, over straw, over soil, and built growing systems that fed families through dry years without a water bill and without a supply chain. They did not call it a method. They called it farming. The knowledge did not disappear because it failed. Every documented trial, every field measurement, every backyard record from Josephine Treadwell in Kansas to Marcus Delacroix in Colorado to Simone Arsenault in Sacramento points in the same direction. The moisture retention is real. The fungal activation is real. The yield consistency through drought is real. It disappeared because the economy that replaced it had no room for free systems. Tavarius Odom farmed this way in Iowa through the 1960s and 1970s. His extension funding requests were denied twice because his system was not scalable. Not scalable meant it could not be replicated by machine across 10,000 acres. It also meant it could not generate a supply chain. It could not be monetized per acre per season. It could not anchor a market. So it was set aside. And a generation of farmers who might have learned it from their parents learned something else instead. They learned to buy. They learned to lease. They learned to schedule irrigation, calculate input costs, and negotiate fertilizer contracts. They learned a kind of farming that sends a bill every spring and calls that bill the cost of doing business. But Darnell Whitfield is not sending that bill anymore. Not the same one. He built his first buried wood bed last October. 60 feet long. 4 feet deep. Hardwood from the same brush piles he used to burn. He added the nitrogen layer. He packed it aggressively. He watered once to initiate colonization, and then he waited. This past summer, during the same drought that cut his conventional field yield by nearly a third, the bed produced without interruption. He ran his soil probe through it every week and wrote the numbers in a notebook with his daughter's name on the cover, because she was the one who asked him to keep track. He is building 3 more beds this fall. He has not called the irrigation company. He has not opened the fertilizer catalog. He stood at the edge of his property last week and watched a neighbor burn a brush pile 200 yards away. Watched the smoke rise and drift east over fields that will need water pumped from a declining aquifer next summer. Watched the ash settle over cracked clay that gets harder every dry year. He did not say anything. But he thought about his daughter's notebook. About the moisture numbers from August. About one burial that could outlast everyone standing in that field. This is not nostalgia. It is not a fantasy about returning to some simpler time. It is a documented, measurable, accessible choice available to anyone with a shovel and an afternoon. The soil does not need to be convinced. The physics does not need to be argued into working. It has always worked. It was working before the first irrigation pivot was installed, and it will be working long after the last one rusts. The only question is whether the people standing above it choose to remember. The shovel goes in at 6:45 in the morning. Josephine Treadwell is marking the outline of a new trench in the far corner of her backyard. It is October. The air is cool. The cottonwood at the back fence has already dropped half its leaves, and they are piling against the fence line in a way that, 6 months ago, she would have raked into bags and set at the curb. She does not do that anymore. She stacks them. She saves the fallen branches. She watches the neighbor's brush pile with an entirely different kind of attention than she used to. Because she knows what those branches are now. Not yard waste. Not a fire hazard. Not a disposal problem. Water. Stored carbon. A century of underground infrastructure waiting to be built for the cost of an afternoon's work. Here is what it takes. A trench, 3 feet deep at a minimum. Deeper if the climate runs hot and dry. Hardwood logs at the base, oak, maple, beech, 4 to 8 inches thick, laid horizontally, packed with no air gaps between them. Smaller branches above that, packed equally tight. A generous layer of nitrogen-rich organic material above the branches, aged manure, finished compost, grass clippings, thick enough to buffer the decomposition chemistry in the first season. Topsoil over everything, crowned slightly above grade, packed firmly in stages. 1 deep watering to begin the process. Then seeds. Then patience. Year 1 is ordinary. The system is not performing yet. It is organizing underground. Building the fungal threads. Saturating the wood structure. Settling into the soil chemistry around it. If a gardener quits in year 1 because the results look modest, they will never see year 3. And year 3 is the proof. In year 3, the moisture retention is measurable without a probe. The soil stays dark longer after rain. The surface stays cool longer into the afternoon heat. The plant's roots go deeper and stand steadier, and produce later into the season than plants in conventional beds 3 feet away. The supplemental watering drops by half. Sometimes more. And it does not stop there. The decomposition cycle continues for 60 years. 100 years. The wood feeds the fungal network. The fungal network feeds the plants. The moisture stored in the wood structure releases slowly upward through every dry week of every dry summer for as long as the wood persists. 1 burial. No monthly bill is attached to it. Darnell Whitfield has 3 more trenches marked in his field this fall. Jerome Pulliam is presenting his 14-page documentation to the Regional Agricultural Board next month. Josephine Treadwell has started answering questions from 4 neighbors who watched her garden stay green through a Stage 2 drought restriction and could not explain it. Marcus Delacroix in Colorado is teaching a free Saturday workshop in his backyard for anyone who wants to come watch the process from the first shovel to the final layer. Adrian and Deontay Frazier in Amarillo are saving every branch from their property this fall and building 2 more beds before the first frost. Simone Arsenault in Sacramento is expanding to a 3rd lot. None of them has a corporate sponsor. None of them filed a patent. None of them is selling a product. They are just building trenches. Burying wood. Letting physics do what physics has always done when given the right conditions underground. The branch pile at the edge of Darnell's fence is still there this morning. 30 years of fall cleanups had taught his hands to reach for a match when he saw it. This year, his hands reach for the shovel instead. He marks the first corner of the trench with a stake. Then the second. The soil is cool and dark, and it gives easily under the blade. 4 feet down, the earth smells the way it smells after rain, that deep, ancient, living smell that means the microbial world is already present and already working. He does not need to add anything to make it start. He just needs to give it what it has been asking for. The question was never whether the soil could remember. The question was whether we could. If this story made you think differently about what is sitting in your backyard right now, if it made you look at a pile of branches and see something other than yard waste, share it with 1 person who grows food. 1 neighbor. 1 family member. 1 friend has a garden. Because the only thing that spreads faster than drought is the knowledge that beats it. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every week, this channel brings you stories of ordinary people who found solutions hiding in plain sight, in the soil, in the science, in the practices we set aside too soon. You do not want to miss what is coming next. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever tried burying wood in your garden? Have you heard of this method before today? Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read to finally pick up a shovel. The soil waited decades for us to remember. It is still waiting.